Hey, what you reading for?
My top 10 horror books of all time. This is a very personal list. These books impacted me on a very personal level that I will get into in a bit. Only one entry per author, no short story collections, only novels or novellas. I really don't make the distinction between novels or novellas for this video. But we do have two books from the 1950s, one from the 1960s, two from the 70s, two from the 80s, and three from this century. So there is a bit of diversity here. What these books all have in common is that they are all expertly crafted works of fiction. For me, it is not enough simply to have a good story. I need excellence in the craft of writing. Otherwise, I will not be able to get immersed in the book. I also need some invention or some creativity. The same tired tropes are never going to work on me, no matter how good the execution. I also try to favor books that have had a significant impact on the world of horror, but more so than that, these books have had a major impact on me as a horror fan. So please don't forget to like and subscribe, help out the algorithm, help out the channel. Your support is much appreciated. I will run a short intro sequence and I'll see you on the other side for my top 10 best horror books of all time. Kicking off the top 10, a debut novel from 1980, and that is Disturb Not the Dream by Paula Trachtman. This was a very surprising reading experience for me. I was not prepared for this book when I read it. Most of the book reads like what I would imagine Victorian erotica would read like. Wealthy people living in big estates, luxuriant lifestyles, and everyone having sex with everyone, and beautiful, if not at times, melodramatic prose. And bookended on either side of this family drama / Victorian erotica are scenes of crazy, over-the-top violence, blood and murder, and people losing their heads, figuratively and literally. The best way I can describe this book is V.C. Andrews on crack. I had a blast with this book. I was very impressed with the writing. Trigger warnings for everything, by the way. But if you like incest and children being beheaded, then there's a good chance that this is the book for you. And for me, it comes in at number 10. Coming in at number 9 from 2015, a book that should not have worked on me, but it definitely did. And that is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Now, I say that it shouldn't have worked on me because it's YA or borderline YA. I do not read YA. I do not like that writing style. And it is a referential book with lots of winks and nods and references to other works of horror. And typically, I do not care for referential books or referential works. I find them too cute, too clever for their own good, playful, if you will. And me, I don't want cute in my horror. I don't want playful in my horror. I'm not looking to have a good time. I am looking to be psychologically and emotionally challenged. Good time, that's not really my thing, you know? And also, this book, A Head Full of Ghosts, is about exorcisms or an exorcism. And I hate exorcisms, like aggressively hate this trope. And the reason why I hate it is twofold. Firstly, it's just the lack of originality. I mean, I've read books about exorcisms, seen movies about exorcisms. Just I need more invention. And also, exorcisms are intense forms of child abuse. And I'm not comfortable with creatives using this form of child abuse as a legitimate solution to a problem and using it for cultural tropes for their works of fiction. Just not comfortable with them. I find it kind of gross, actually. And it's just not creative. So there are many reasons why I should not have liked A Head Full of Ghosts, but I loved it. And one of the reasons why is that he, the author, Paul Tremblay, he manages to treat exorcisms in a socially responsible way without being preachy, which is very important, and without diminishing from the creep factor. In fact, his treatment of exorcisms, exploring the psychological and family dynamics that go into this horrible situation, it serves the book well and it adds to the creep factor. And he manages to use this to create a compelling character study, which has some legitimate scares and tension. It's also a book that reads very well. Page after page, the narration is fluid and easy, and it makes for a seamless, pleasurable, thought-provoking reading experience. Coming in at number 8 from 1959, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, Shirley Jackson is one of my favorite authors of all time. In fact, the first video I made for this channel was a ranking of all her novels. And even though The Haunting of the Hill House is not my favorite work of hers, it is the only one I would consider to be a true horror book, and it's a great one. I love the protagonist of this book, Eleanor. She spent most of her adult life sheltered and cut off from everyone else because she had to take care of her sick mother. And then when her mother dies, she is suddenly free to explore the world, free to explore adulthood, to try out new adventures and discover new things. And she is ill prepared for all this, but that doesn't stop her from jumping into these new experiences with unwarranted optimism. Everything is going to be great. Journeys end in lovers' meeting, as she frequently says, quoting Shakespeare from Twelfth Night. So why shouldn't her journey end in lovers' meeting? And I love this character. I connected with her because I'm very much the same way. I'm frequently jumping into new opportunities, new experiences, completely unprepared. I'll move to a new country with no job, no money, not knowing anyone, but with undeserved optimism. So I connected with this character. Also, I love the way Shirley Jackson writes. It's always nice spending time in her slightly dark, slightly magical, slightly cynical world. The writing is great, the story is great, the character is great. Love this book. Coming in at number 7, also from 1959, is Psycho by Robert Bloch. Psycho is the smelliest book I have ever read. The Bates Motel, which is featured in this work, is near a swamp. It's hot and muggy. The motel is old and mildewy. The hotel manager is unhygienic, fat and sweaty. The book just smells gross and swampy. The pages are sticky and grimy. I had to wash my hands or take a shower after reading it. There is also a good amount of tension throughout the book, and I think Robert Bloch adds the perfect amount of camp to make the nastiness go down better. I had a great time with this one. And whereas the movie is gorgeous and glamorous with beautiful actors and beautiful sets, the book is ugly and smelly and nasty and grimy and swampy, and I loved it. Coming in at number 6, Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco from 1973. A book about obsession. I love obsession. A book that treats the family values movement of the 1970s as a source of horror. I think that's fantastic. It's transgressive. I think that's an important aspect of horror. An important aspect that I feel is being neglected in the current crop of horror that's coming out nowadays, but it's not neglected here. In Burnt Offerings, we have a family that rents a summer holiday home on Long Island, and they have the intention of getting away from the city and getting some rest and relaxation, but the house has its own agenda. One of the more unique haunted house stories out there, and there is an excellent movie adaptation of this work, which has a different ending, which also works. So if obsession and families coming apart and houses coming alive, if that sounds like your kind of thing, make sure to check out Burnt Offerings. Cracking the top 5, we have The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker from 1986. Probably my favorite author of all time, Clive Barker. This isn't necessarily my favorite work of his, but as a pure horror experience, this one is great. It's transgressive, it's bloody and inventive, and it had a huge impact on the world of horror, and it had a huge impact on me as a horror fan. Men being lured to their deaths by the promise of an illicit sexual experience. Men being lured to the torture chambers of hell by the promise of unimaginable pleasures. We have chains flying through the air that tear into the flesh and rip it apart from all sides. We have sex with a skinless sociopath. There's a lot to like here in this short book. And controversial opinion, the sequel, The Scarlet Gospels, which is wildly different, I think it's quite good too. But it is the original that makes my top 10, coming in at number 5. At number 4, from the year 2000, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. An unconventional way to tell a story. House of Leaves is a manuscript that was dictated by a blind man to various assistants, later annotated and footnoted, then discarded, then found by a junkie who writes his own story in the margins. And the manuscript is about a documentary and the social impact of this documentary, which is about a house with irrational dimensions and corridors, seemingly endless corridors that appear out of nowhere overnight. It is a book about labyrinths that is presented as labyrinths. It is an incredibly layered work. It is satire. It's laugh out loud funny. There are passages of just stunningly beautiful prose, and there are legit scares in this book as well. I don't know much about this author. I don't know much about the creation of this book, but I do get a very strong sense that this book was largely inspired by Jorge Luis Borges' Ficciones. So, fans of that seminal short story collection should definitely check out House of Leaves. And fans of House of Leaves should definitely check out Jorge Luis Borges' Ficciones. Certainly not the first book to have been inspired by that seminal masterpiece of a short story collection, but in my opinion, I think it is the best. It provides a different reading experience than you would normally get from a standard novel, so I think you should be aware of that when going into this read. It's not an easy read, but in my opinion, definitely a worthwhile one. At number 3, The Reddening by Adam Neville from 2019. Now, this book is very personal to me because I read it during the COVID lockdown, and at that time I was feeling quite disillusioned with horror. I was feeling like all the horror that's being made, that's being put out, is for younger readers. It's cute bubblegum pop horror for mass appeal, and real horror fans like me, I was feeling like we had been neglected, we had been forgotten. And then I read The Reddening, and oh, it was a breath of fresh air from my dark heart. Horror that pays attention to the craft, horror that is well written, that has compelling adult characters, that is psychologically and emotionally challenging. And it is hands down the scariest book I have ever read. So it is a very important book for me in my horror experience. I have since gone on to read all 12 of the novels Adam Neville has put out. I have a ranking of them that you might want to check out. I also had 3 conversations with Adam Neville that make for very interesting videos, I think, about his work, about horror in general, the history of horror, and about his writing process. I'll leave links to those videos in the show notes. So if you're a horror fan, I think you should check them out. This book, The Reddening, has ancient things resurfacing. It has a cult. It has beasts. It has a lot going for it. And it's a very important book for me. It alone restored my faith in horror, if I'm being honest. And so it comes in at number 3. At number 2, my second favorite horror book of all time is from 1972, and it is The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. The Stepford Wives was very important to me growing up. I believe it was the very first horror movie I ever saw. At least one of the first horror movies I ever saw. And years later, or decades later, I read the book and I was blown away. Even though I knew the story well, the reading experience that this book gave me was still tension-filled and even scary. It's a short book, about 120 pages or so, and there is not a wasted word in it. It is incredibly layered. It's a satire of the U.S. consumerism culture. It's a condemnation of the patriarchal society, a send-up of U.S. suburban life. It's incredibly layered. It's funny, it's thought-provoking, it's scary, and in classic Ira Levin fashion, it has, I think, the perfect touch of camp to it. And unquestionably, it has had a major impact on the world of horror with all the imitators and homages and retellings, and it has had a huge impact on me as a horror fan. A classic for a reason, and it makes my list at number 2. Which means that coming in at the number 1 spot as my favorite horror book of all time from 1962, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. I almost don't think of this book as a horror book, even though it lives in the horror universe. We have a nefarious magical carnival that comes into town overnight. We have a villainous villain in the tattooed man who runs the carnival. We have his henchmen, one of which is a flying witch. So it's clearly a horror book, but it is gorgeously written with plenty of literary flair. And at its core, this book is about a father-son relationship and about the passage of time, which works to separate the two, separates the father from the son. It was not only an extremely pleasurable book for me to read, but it was also a highly emotional one as well. I will admit to you that when I finished reading this book, I had tears in my eyes. Not only in my eyes, I had tears running down my cheeks. My mascara was all smudged. I was doing that quivering lip thing. I was a mess. A powerful book, a beautiful book, and an emotionally impactful read for me. And it is my favorite horror book of all time. So there you have it, my top 10 favorite horror books of all time. What do you think of my list? Do you have any experience with the books or the authors I talked about in this video? What books would top your top 10 list? I always love connecting with you in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.